Elara stood in the hollowed-out heart of her father's study. The room, once a sanctuary of paper, ink, and brass, was now just a box of echoes. Dust motes danced in the slanted afternoon light, illuminating the pale rectangles on the walls where maps had hung for decades. Her uncle Marcus stood by the door, his posture a study in impatient finality. He did not belong here. His presence was a violation, like a crow in a robin's nest. He held a thin sheaf of papers in one hand and a small insulting stack of banknotes in the other. She did not cry. She did not plead. The grief for her father, 6 months gone, had scoured her clean of such displays. What remained was a quiet, cold calm, a numbness that felt like its own kind of armor. Her father, a master surveyor and shipwright, had not raised a daughter for hysterics. He had raised her for ballast, for true north, for the quiet competence of a well-made joint. He had taught her the world through the lens of a sextant and the grain of wood. "The house is sold, Elara," Marcus said, his voice as dry as the dust in the air. "The new owners take possession on Friday. This," he gestured with the banknotes, "is your portion after debts were settled. $500. It's more than fair." Elara looked at the money. It was the price of a life dismantled, of memories auctioned and scattered. It was an insult wrapped in the language of accounting. She said nothing. Her gaze drifted to the last remaining object on the great oak desk, her father's brass sextant. It was a heavy, beautiful instrument, its arc and vernier scale gleaming with the soft patina of 1,000 careful uses. It was the one thing she had claimed, the one thing she would not allow to be sold. It was hers. It was him. Marcus followed her gaze and sniffed, a small, dismissive sound. "And this," he said, picking up a rolled piece of vellum tied with a brittle string. He tossed it onto the desk beside the sextant. It landed with a soft, papery sigh. "This was also in his safe, part of some old family land grant, I believe. Utterly worthless, of course. The valuable half showing the timber rights inland I've retained. This piece just shows some god-forsaken rock on the coast. A folly. But it was his, so now it is yours. Your inheritance." The word inheritance was a barb, and she felt it pierce the calm. Her true inheritance wasn't in a safe. It was etched into her memory, a poem her father had made her recite on rainy evenings, his deep voice a counterpoint to the drumming on the roof. It began, "From the seventh stone where the salt wind sighs, lift your eye to where the osprey flies." It was a long, strange poem full of seemingly nonsensical directions, celestial alignments, and cryptic warnings. 30 degrees from the winter sun's low grace, find the mason's pride, the unmarked face. She had learned it by heart, the cadence a comfort, the words a mystery she never thought to solve. Until now. She took the roll of vellum. She took the $500. She did not look at Marcus again. She walked to the desk, her hand closing over the cool, solid weight of the sextant. Its familiar heft was a reassurance, a connection to the man who had taught her that the most valuable maps are not drawn on paper. She placed it carefully into a worn leather satchel, alongside a set of calipers, a small adze, her father's whetstone, and a change of clothes. Her life, packed into a single bag. She left the house that had been her entire world and did not look back. The journey north was a pilgrimage into solitude. She bought a sturdy, sway-backed horse for a pittance and rode through rolling hills that slowly flattened into windswept coastal plains. The air grew heavy with the scent of salt and decay, the green of the fields giving way to the muted gray-browns of dune grass and rock. The sky was a vast, indifferent canvas of moving cloud. Each night she made camp, her movements economical and sure. She built a small fire, her father's lessons on wind direction and tinder guiding her hands. She ate sparingly, making the food she'd bought last. She would sit by the fire, the sextant in her lap, and recite the poem under her breath, its verses a rosary against the encroaching loneliness. She was adrift, but she was not lost. Her father had made sure of that. After 9 days of travel, she arrived in a town that seemed to be clinging to the edge of the world by its fingernails. A sign, its paint blistered and peeling, read Port Sorrow. It was a fitting name. The buildings hunched against the perpetual wind, their windows like weary eyes staring out at a churning, gray sea. The people she passed on the single muddy street had the same look. She found the county records office in a damp, mildewed room at the back of the harbor master's building. The clerk was a sallow man with ink stains on his cuffs and a permanent air of weary disdain. Elara unrolled her half of the map on his cluttered counter. The vellum was brittle, the ink faded. It showed a jagged line of coastline, a treacherous-looking point of land jutting into the ocean, and, marked with a small, elegant cross, a single structure. The clerk peered at it, then let out a short, barking laugh. "Finch's Folly," he said, shaking his head. "Lady, you've been had. That map's been a local joke for 100 years. I want to see the deed," Ilara said, her voice even. "The deed?" He laughed again. "There's a deed sure enough, and a tax bill that no one's paid since the last keeper went mad and walked into the sea. It's a ruin, a pile of rocks on a worthless spit of land. The lighthouse is collapsed. The keeper's house is a shell. The whole place is battered by every storm that comes up the coast. It's cursed." "How much to clear the taxes and transfer the title?" she asked, ignoring his pronouncements. He looked at her as if she were the mad one. He shuffled through a massive, dusty ledger, his finger running down a list of forgotten properties. $450, he said, a note of disbelief in his own voice, for clear title to the most useless piece of real estate on this coast. It was almost everything she had. It was a desperate, foolish gamble. It was the only thing she could do. "I'll take it," she said. The clerk stared, then shrugged, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. He clearly thought this was the best entertainment he'd had in months. He drew up the papers, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. Ilara signed her name, the ink bleeding slightly on the cheap paper. She pushed the worn banknotes across the counter. He counted them slowly, then stamped the deed with a heavy final thud. "Congratulations, mistress," he said, the word dripping with irony. "You are now the proud owner of Finch's Folly." She took the deed, rolled it with her map, and walked out into the wind. She spent her last $50 on provisions: flour, salt, dried beans, a new axe head, and a box of nails. The shopkeeper, a stern-faced woman named Mistress Gable, watched her pack the goods onto her horse. "Headed for the point, are you?" the woman asked, her voice flat. "I am," Ilara replied. Mistress Gable just shook her head slowly and went back inside her shop. The path to the point was less a path and more a suggestion. It wound over rocky bluffs and through thickets of gorse that tore at her clothes. The sea was a constant, thunderous presence to her left, its spray misting the air. After 2 hours, she rounded a final high bluff and saw it, Finch's Folly. Her heart sank. The clerk had not been exaggerating. It was worse. The lighthouse tower still stood, a defiant cylinder of grey stone against the sky, but its top was a jagged crown. The lantern house was gone, shattered. Below it, the keeper's cottage was a skeleton. Its roof had caved in on one side, and the empty window frames looked like eye sockets in a skull. A low stone wall enclosing a small yard had crumbled into heaps of rock. The place didn't just look abandoned, it looked defeated, slain by the sea and the sky. A wave of despair, cold and vast as the ocean before her, washed over Ilara. Marcus had been right. It was worthless. A joke. She had traded everything for a pile of rubble on a windswept rock at the end of the world. For a long moment, she simply stood there, the wind whipping her hair across her face, feeling the full weight of her solitude. Then she took a breath. The air was clean and sharp, biting with salt. She could smell the wet stone, the damp earth, the faint resinous scent of the tough, stunted pines that clung to the landward side of the point. This was her rock now, her folly. Her father had not taught her to surrender to despair. He had taught her to assess, to plan, to build. She tethered her horse in the lee of a surprisingly intact section of the wall and began her survey. She walked the perimeter, her boots crunching on fallen slate and broken glass. She ran her hands over the stone of the cottage, testing the mortar. It was crumbling, rotten with a century of damp. The main timbers of the roof were cracked, but the stone walls themselves on the north and east sides were still plumb. Inside, the floor was a ruin of plaster, sodden wood, and the nests of seabirds. But in the back, a small room, likely a pantry or scullery, was mostly intact. Its roof, sheltered by the main bulk of the house, had held. It was small, damp, and dark, but it was shelter. She spent the rest of the day making that small room habitable. She swept out the debris, her broom a bundle of wiry branches tied to a stick. She used her adze to pry up the rotten floorboards, revealing packed earth beneath. She found a few intact shutters and, with considerable effort, managed to wrestle one into the empty window frame, blocking the worst of the wind. By nightfall, she had a small, defensible space. She built a fire in the lee of the cottage wall, ate a meager meal of beans and hard bread, and watched the stars emerge, brilliant and cold in the clear, dark sky. The next morning, she turned her attention to the lighthouse. It was a masterpiece of masonry, a testament to a forgotten skill. The great granite blocks were fitted together with a precision that was breathtaking. Even with the top shattered, the tower itself felt as solid as the bedrock it was built on. She walked around its base, her hand trailing on the cold, rough stone, and then she saw it, an anomaly. On the seaward side, about 4 feet up from the foundation, was a single course of 7 stones. They were the same granite as the rest, but their faces were dressed differently. They were smoother, their edges sharper, as if they had been laid by a different, more meticulous hand, or for a different purpose. Her heart began to beat faster. She pulled the vellum map from her satchel and recited the poem from memory. From the 7th stone where the salt wind sighs, lift your eye to where the osprey flies. 30 degrees from the winter sun's low grace, find the mason's pride, the unmarked face, the 7th stone. This had to be it. She looked up. There was no osprey now, but she could see the remnants of a nest high on the cliff face beyond the tower. She took out her father's sextant. It felt like a key in her hand. The winter sun was months away, but her father had taught her to read the almanac of the sky. She knew the azimuth of the winter solstice sunrise for this latitude. She took a bearing from the center of the 7th stone course, 30 degrees north. Her line of sight landed squarely on the middle of the 3rd stone in the sequence. The mason's pride, the unmarked face. The stone looked no different from its neighbors. She ran her hands over it, pressing, searching for a seam, a switch, a flaw. Nothing. She tapped it with the handle of her knife. It sounded solid, a dull thud. She tapped the stones on either side, the same. She sat back on her heels, frustrated. What was she missing? The poem was a set of instructions, precise and literal. She had followed them. She thought of her father, of his patience. Look at the problem from all angles, Ilara. The answer is always there. You just have to find the right way to see it. She lay on her stomach on the cold, damp ground, looking up at the stone. From this angle, she could see the bottom edge, and there, so small it was almost invisible, was a tiny drilled hole, no bigger than a nail. It was a weep hole, designed to let moisture out from behind the masonry, but this one was perfectly round, unnaturally so. She took a nail from the box she had bought and pushed it gently into the hole. It slid in, meeting soft resistance, then clicked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan of stone on stone, the unmarked face of the block shifted inward by a fraction of an inch. A seam appeared, fine as a spider's thread. Her breath caught in her throat. Using the tips of her fingers, she pulled. The stone block, impossibly, swung inward on a hidden, counterweighted pivot. It moved with a silent, well-oiled smoothness that spoke of incredible craftsmanship. It revealed a dark, narrow opening. The air that wafted out was cool and dry, smelling not of mildew, but of dust and time. Using a piece of kindling as a makeshift torch, she squeezed through the opening. She was in a small, stone-lined chamber, no bigger than a closet, built into the massive foundation of the lighthouse itself. It was bone dry, and in the center of the chamber sat a single object, a heavy, iron-bound sea chest. It was not locked. With trembling hands, she lifted the heavy lid. The torchlight glinted on metal. The chest was filled, almost to the brim, with gold coins. Not Spanish doubloons or pirate treasure, but sovereign coins, English guineas, American eagles. It was a fortune, a staggering, life-altering fortune. But beneath the coins, wrapped in a sheath of oilcloth, was something else. A leather-bound book, a logbook. She carried the book back out into the daylight and sat with her back against the tower, the cold stone a grounding force. She unwrapped the oilcloth. The leather was supple, the pages crisp. The ink was a faded brown, but the handwriting was clear and strong. The first entry was dated over a century ago. "My name is Alistair Finch," it began. "I was once a captain of clipper ships and a designer of harbors. I was betrayed by my partners, the house of Marcus Thorne, who used my designs, claimed my profits, and cast me out with a pittance and a false accusation of incompetence. They thought me broken. They were wrong." Ilara's blood ran cold. Marcus Thorne. Her uncle's name was Marcus Thorne. This was not a coincidence. This was a story rhyming with her own across a century of time. She read on, mesmerized. Finch had used his last remaining funds and his unparalleled skill as an engineer to buy this worthless point of land and build this lighthouse, not for any government, but for himself. It was a private beacon, a monument to his own competence and a fortress of solitude. He had built it to last 1,000 years, a silent rebuke to the men who had wronged him. He wrote of the quarrying of the stone, the geometry of the spiral staircase, the grinding of the great lens he had ordered from France. He wrote of his loneliness, but also of a profound peace he found in the work, in the cry of the gulls and the eternal rhythm of the tides. The final entry was written in a shaky hand. My time grows short. The sea, my old friend, calls to me. I leave this light and this cash for whoever comes after. But not for just anyone. I have left 2 maps. One, showing the worthless land I have sent to the descendants of Thorn, an insult to be rediscovered in some dusty archive. The other map, the true map, is not on paper. It is in the design of this tower, in the sky, in the mind of one who knows how to look. If you have found this, you are not a scavenger. You are a builder. You are a kindred spirit. The gold is yours. Use it to make this place live again. Do not let the light go out. It is a better inheritance than land or titles. It is a purpose. Tears streamed down Ilara's face. They were the first tears she had shed since her father died. They were not tears of grief, but of a profound, aching gratitude. She was not alone. A stranger, a ghost of stone and ink, had reached across 100 years, seen her, and understood. He had left her not just a fortune, but a blessing, a purpose. She did not cry for long. There was work to do. The gold changed everything. It was not a treasure to be hoarded, but a tool to be used. The next day, she rode back to Port Sorrow. She went first to the blacksmith, a hulking man named Silas, whose forge shed a warm orange glow onto the grey street. His arms were as thick as mooring posts, his face perpetually grim. I need tools, she said, laying out a list. And I need custom work. Brackets, hinges, a new frame for a lantern house. Silas looked at the list, then at her. This is for the folly, he stated, not a question. It is. Waste of good iron, he grunted. Ilara placed a gold eagle on the anvil between them. It shone in the firelight. I am paying for the iron, and for your time, and I will pay well. Silas stared at the coin, then at her, a new light in his eyes. It was not just greed, it was the dawning of respect. This was not some flighty fool. This was a serious person. I'll need to see the plans for the frame, he said, his voice gruffer than before, but without the dismissive edge. Bring me the measurements. Her next stop was Mistress Gable's general store. She bought lumber, sacks of lime for mortar, barrels of oil, ropes, pulleys, and enough food to last for months. She paid in gold, and the woman's stern face softened with surprise. You're serious about this, Mistress Gable said, her hands on her hips. I am. You'll need help getting this lot out to the point. I'll manage. Mistress Gable studied her for a long moment. No, you won't, she said finally. My boy will bring it out with the freight wagon tomorrow. No charge for the freight. Call it an investment in seeing something interesting happen in this town for a change. The work began in earnest. Ilara became a creature of methodical labor, her days governed by the sun and the tides. She started with the keeper's cottage, the place that would be her home. She cleared the rubble, her hands growing calloused and strong. She learned the art of masonry, mixing mortar and resetting the fallen stones of the collapsed wall, her father's plumb bob ensuring every course was true. She climbed onto the roof, a rope tied around her waist, and with terrifying effort tore out the rotten timbers. Using a system of pulleys and the strength of her long-suffering horse, she hauled new beams into place, cutting the joints with a precision that would have made her father proud. She reslated the entire roof, each piece overlapping its neighbor in a perfect watertight pattern. Silas came out periodically, initially to take measurements, then to deliver the finished ironwork. He would stand for a while, arms crossed, watching her work. He never offered praise, but he started pointing out things. That mix is a bit wet, you'll get shrinkage cracks. Or, you'll want to brace that wall before you put the full weight of the roof on it. It was not criticism. It was the conversation of craftsmen, a dialogue of shared competence. One day, she had another visitor, an old man with a face like a weathered map and clear, intelligent eyes. He introduced himself as Elias, the town's unofficial historian. I had to see it for myself, he said, his voice a dry rustle. They say in town you're raising Finch's folly from the dead. Ilara offered him a cup of water. I'm repairing it. Elias walked around, his gaze taking in every detail. He touched the new mortar, looked at the clean lines of the new roof beams. You do good work, he said. It was the highest of compliments. He told her stories of the point of Captain Finch, who the town had thought an eccentric hermit. He spoke of the shipwrecks on the rocks the lighthouse was meant to warn against. He became a regular visitor, bringing her books on local history and, once, a precious jar of his wife's raspberry jam. Through the long weeks of autumn, the cottage was transformed. It was no longer a ruin, but a snug, sturdy house. It had glass in its windows, a fire in its hearth, and the smell of sawdust and linseed oil in its rooms. With her home secure, Ilara turned her full attention to the tower. This was the great work. She spent days just clearing a century of guano and debris from the spiral staircase. She repaired the cracked stone of the steps, repointed the interior walls. She climbed to the jagged top 100 feet in the air, the wind a constant, violent force, and surveyed the damage. The lantern house was completely gone. It would have to be rebuilt from scratch. She drew the plans herself based on the descriptions in Finch's logbook and the surviving iron footings. She gave the plans to Silas, who looked them over with a critical eye. Ambitious, he grunted. The clockwork for the rotation, that's delicate. You sure you know how this works? Yes, Ilara said simply. Her father had loved clockwork mechanisms, the elegant dance of gears and escapements. He had taught her their language. Slowly, piece by piece, the lantern house was reborn in Silas's forge. While he worked the iron, Ilara tackled the most daunting task of all, the lens. Miraculously, the great Fresnel lens, a beehive of cut glass prisms, had not been shattered. It had fallen from its mountings when the lantern house collapsed, but had landed in a deep drift of sand and bird nests that had cushioned its fall. It was, however, filthy, and its brass frame was bent and corroded. For weeks, she worked on it in a makeshift workshop she built. She cleaned each prism with a mixture of vinegar and pure water, her touch infinitely gentle. She polished the brass until it shone, using her father's calipers to carefully straighten every bent strut. She was not just cleaning a piece of equipment, she was resurrecting a marvel, an engine of light. The day the new iron frame was ready, Silas and 3 other men from the town came out to help. They said nothing, but they worked with a quiet efficiency, hauling the heavy pieces to the top of the tower. Ilara directed them, her voice calm and certain, and they followed her instructions without question. By dusk, the new lantern house, a cage of black iron, stood atop the tower, ready for its glass. As winter approached, a new sense of urgency filled the air. The old-timers in town spoke of the equinox fury, a storm that came every few years with the power to remake the coastline. The sky began to brood, the sea turning a sullen, leaden gray. Ilara worked feverishly. With the help of a complex web of ropes and pulleys, she and Silas winched the restored lens into the new lantern house. The final piece was the lamp itself, a multi-wick oil lamp she had painstakingly rebuilt. The storm was only a day away when she fitted the last pane of glass into the frame. That night the storm hit. It was a monster. The wind shrieked like a banshee, and waves, vast and terrible, exploded against the rocks below, sending spray clear over the top of the lighthouse. The cottage, her sturdy, well-built home, shuddered with each impact. Ilara sat by the fire, listening to the fury, a strange sense of peace in her heart. Her work was being tested. She and Alistair Finch were being tested. Sometime after midnight, through the howling of the wind, she heard a new sound, a deep, mournful boom, a signal cannon, a ship in distress. She pulled on her oilskins and fought her way out into the storm. The force of the wind almost knocked her from her feet. She struggled to the base of the tower and began to climb, the stone cold and slick beneath her hands. In the lantern room, the storm was a deafening roar. The entire tower vibrated, but it held. It held. Peering out into the maelstrom, she saw it, a faint flickering light far too close to the deadly shoals known as the Dragon's Teeth. A fishing trawler, its engine likely failed, being driven onto the rocks. She worked with a frantic, focused energy. She filled the lamp, trimmed the wicks, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. She lit the lamp. A warm, yellow glow filled the lantern room. Then she engaged the clockwork. With a soft whir and a gentle click, the mechanism Alistair Finch had designed and she had restored came to life. The great lens began to turn. A single powerful beam of light cut through the rain and spray, a blade of hope in the heart of the storm. Once, twice, a steady repeating flash. She did not know if they would see it. She did not know if it would be enough. She could only do the work. She stayed there all night, watching the beam sweep across the furious ocean, a solitary keeper at her post. By dawn, the storm had broken. The sky was bruised purple and gray, but the wind had eased. Exhausted, she made her way down. As she stepped from the tower, she saw a group of people standing near her cottage. It was Silas and Mistress Gable and Elias and a dozen other townsfolk. They were staring up at the lighthouse at the still flashing light. Silas walked toward her. His grim face was etched with exhaustion and something else. Awe. "The sea serpent," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She made it, tucked into Smuggler's Cove. Her engine failed. They were blind, being driven straight for the teeth. They saw your light. You saved them. You saved them all." Elara just nodded, too tired to speak. Mistress Gable came forward and wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders. Elias placed a warm hand on her arm. No one said much. They did not need to. In the shared light of that dawn, a community was forged, built not on pleasantries but on the bedrock of mutual, hard-won respect. Months passed. The lighthouse became a permanent feature of the coast, its light a comfort to the sailors and a source of quiet pride for the town. Elara was no longer the foolish outsider, she was the keeper. She was part of the place as much as the rock and the sea. One clear, calm evening, she stood in the lantern room, polishing the brass of the lens mount. The setting sun filled the sky with soft colors. Her home below was warm and bright, a sturdy haven. On a small shelf she had built, her father's brass sextant sat beside a small, intricately carved wooden osprey she had found at the bottom of Alistair Finch's chest. Her two inheritances, one of skill, one of spirit, sitting side by side. She looked out at the tranquil sea. Her uncle had given her a worthless map to a pile of rocks, an act of petty cruelty meant to banish her from his world. But her father had given her a different kind of map, a poem of knowledge and competence. That poem had unlocked not just a fortune, but a future. It had led her here, to this tower, to this life of purpose and peace. The $450 she had given the mocking clerk for a ruin had not been a foolish expense. It was the best money she ever spent.